The world of video games has several successful companies. Companies like Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, and more. Regardless of what you think of these companies, they are nothing if not successful. Even the smaller ones have their hits. Sega, Activision, and Insomniac may not be as successful, but they're still making games and are still successful to this day. But one of the companies that wasn't successful anymore really should have been. They really should have been on top of the world. But in the 90s, they kind of were. But in the 2000s, things would radically change for them. What company are they talking about? Well, they developed some of the best games for Nintendo platforms. They are... That's right, Rare, or Rareware Inc. The company that came in as a huge name for Nintendo. And today, we'll be looking over Rare and its history as we look into the episodes. Greens, I'm Gil on Thomas45, or Thomas45, watching the Great on the Film Podcast, and this is the rise and fall of Rare.
Okay, Smokey, roll 'em.
It's showtime.
Everyone's mad.
So, where does Rareware begin? Well, Rare begins as a company called Ultimate Play the Game in the 1980s, founded by two brothers, Tim and Chris Stamper. The Stamper brothers, if you will. The first game they developed for Ultimate Play the Game was called Jetpack. It's a rather simple affair, released on the New Mind ZX Spectrum, and it had a very much huge name. So, it even won the Golden Joystick Awards. This will lead to a sequel to the game, as well as a new game called Saberwolf. Saberwolf continues the strategy as last time, which really does help out in this case. However, Ultimate Play the Game wouldn't last long on the Stamper Brothers. In 1985, realizing the tides were flowing, they decided to get into this new console called the Nintendo Famicom. Realizing the Ultimate Play the Game didn't really entice people much, they decided to make a new company named Rare. As for Ultimate Play the Game, they sold to a UK developer called named US Games. Ironically, they're a UK developer yet they had the word US in their name. Whatever. They would continue to release games, however, Ultimate Play the Game would eventually go under in 1987. As for Rare, they decided to call it Rare Inc. Well, they also formed an office in Miami. This would also help with some development. The first game developed would be Slalom on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Slalom's a rather simple affair, it's just a regular slalom game, but it got the game some notoriety, along with another game that came out not long afterwards, the first... During this time, Rare was a small game, they would pick up anything they could get their hands on. Whether it be some licenses by LJN, yes, that LJN, with games like, Friday the 13th, Beetlejuice and more, or they would release some small games. However, the first real success was a game called OC Pro AM. OC Pro AM was a game where you control OC cars in the game. It's a simple affair, you just drop one of them, but you place the top 3 and you get to be on the laps. It's rather unique of a game. OC Pro AM is nothing too spectacular, but it got them in the arm in the door as they were prepared to make next games. The next game would be, of course, would be a bit different though. In the 90s, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were everywhere. Okay, they have a solid comic book franchise, and they had their own hit TV series. As such, we decided to look at it all with Battletoads. Battletoads is simple. Two characters named Rash and Zitz have to save their friend Pimple and the princess to some new cultures. Battletoads is more known for its difficulty than anything else. Battletoads is hard as hell. I mean, if anyone's played Battletoads, you know that it's hard. The controls are not easy to get through. Oh, and you think multiplayer can help you? Good luck, brother. Multiplayer cannot help you. It actually makes the game harder. That card section is already hard. Imagine that times 2. And then also, you can attack the other player. Despite this, Battletoads was a success. It became a huge hit nonetheless. To capitalize on this, they even made sequels afterwards. Battletoads was officially released in 1990, released on the NES. Yes. It became a huge hit. Making it a huge name in June 2021. To top out with this, an anime pilot was made, but it was not picked up and gave many good reviews. Ports for the Game Boy, Advance, and Super Nintendo also released too, as well as the Genesis port as well. Another thing that helped out would be a new sequel to the game, Battletoads and Battlemania, and a Tale of the Dragon. Because Battletoads itself remained a small franchise that Rare took home. However, this game would be much bigger. Okay? In 1994, Nintendo bought a 49% stake in the company, making them a second-party developer instead of a third-party developer. However, while that was a big thing, one other big thing that happened was a small... that brought back a certain character who'd been laying dormant for years. Donkey Kong was Nintendo's oldest franchise, starting out as Donkey Kong arcade game in 1981, releasing 3 sequels, Donkey Kong Jr., Donkey Kong Jr. Math, and Donkey Kong 3. However, after Donkey Kong 3, the franchise lay dormant. Other than the re-releases of the original old games, there was no new Donkey Kong game. Rare was up to the task though. Nintendo asked them to take a new Donkey Kong game, and Rare took it upon themselves. The first thing they did was give Donkey Kong a bit of a redesign, giving him a new look that would make him look more unique. In the sprite artwork too, it'd be the first time that Donkey Kong would be seen with his signature tie. While artwork in the original games had a tie on DK, this would be the first time you can actually see it in gameplay. But one key thing I want to remind you all that this is not the same Donkey Kong as it was in the arcades. This one was a different character, entirely. The old Donkey Kong they used was a character named Cranky Kong. Initially, Cranky was meant to be a lot less, well, cranky. He was meant to be more of a wise mentor type. Personally, I prefer Cranky Kong to be, well, his namesake after all. After all, he is Cranky Kong, not Jolly Old Kong. Other new Kongs were added include Funky Kong, a cool hip surfer dude Kong, and Candy Kong, Donkey Kong's girlfriend at the time. But one character they were trying to carry over was Donkey Kong Jr. Donkey Kong Jr. was actually a redesign. However, there was one small catch. When they redesigned him, Nintendo told him this: he looked way too different. He didn't look like Donkey Kong Jr. at all. They asked either to make him look incredibly like Jr. or make him a new character entirely. Not wanting to waste a good idea, they decided to make the new character the exact same as the old character. Right? Nah, they kept the old design, and we named him Diddy Kong. As for the other characters, they were all modeled around him. A new villain was also at the time too, King K. Rool and his Kremlin cronies. As for the game, it utilized 3D graphics, making it one of the first ever 2.5D platformers at a time, using 3D graphics on a 2D plane. Because the Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo was doing Sega Genesis, this added a new look. Look, and the commercials advertise this too, saying that this is not Sega 32X, this is not 3DO, and this is not Atari Jaguar, it is Super Nintendo. No, the game, all things were going well for it. But Donkey Kong Country was released at least for Super Nintendo. On November 18th, 1984. And it was a huge success. Yes, it quickly became the fastest selling game of Nintendo 64's lifespan. And Super Nintendo's third best selling game. It brought Nintendo back into the limelight after Sega Genesis stole it for a bit. The other companies chose innovation. Nintendo chose a fun game that was great to play. Reviews also loved the game. Okay, huge. The difficulty of Donkey Kong Country isn't well, but it's also great. The game itself received several ports, including ports to the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, and a sequel and another series called Donkey Kong Land. As well, which released these ports. It was also remade on the Game Boy Advance. I say remade. It's the same game, but added elements like more of a story and more additional things. Donkey Kong Country would bring the foot in the door they needed. Okay, and they eventually mainly worked on a sequel. The sequel was renamed. Okay. However, not wanting to repeat themselves, they decided not to use Donkey Kong as main protagonist. Instead, their new creation, Diddy Kong, was made the new protagonist. Yes. To add the idea of replayability, they added his girlfriend at the time, Dixie Kong. Like Diddy Kong, Dixie Kong was designed to have a hip, cool attitude in the 90s. The game itself also had some new changes. His internet characters. King K. Rool came back along with his army of Kremlins and Crushers. However, one new thing came in, new cons came into the mix. This includes Swanky Khan, a sort of Pat Sajak-like Khan who acted like a host of things, game shows. We have Wrinkly Khan, an old grandmother-like character, and character. To help counteract this, more and more levels were made even more expansive, and the difficulty was amped up too. Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, came out on this came out on Super Nintendo on November 4th, 1995, and like its franchise seller in the United States, it also was a hit. In fact, to this day, many fans consider it better than the original. It didn't sell as well, but it was mainly just because but it still sold well, becoming one of the fastest selling games on Super Nintendo as well. A third game was developed at the same time, not long afterwards. This time, they wanted to compete that rule by having Dixie Kong have her own game. They brought in a new character to help out with this. Dixie Kong's cousin was Gigantism, Kiddy Kong. After Funky Kong got tired of looking after him. What a parent of the year, guys. Anyways, now that both Donkey and Diddy were kidnapped, God, that makes an awkward sentence. Ugh, I forgot that's her name now. Dixie Kong and her brother Kiddy Kong are now added to the mix and seeing how it goes. Thanks. The game itself was quickly played with Dixie Kong's Double Trouble seemed to do well. However, it was released on November 18th in North America in 1986, caused it to sell less than it was performed. Well, why? Well, before we get to that idea, we have another thing to talk about. In the 90s, fighting games were popular too. Games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter were the main things, and whereas like in America 2 with Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct added some new things. 2 health bars were added. Once a character loses their first health bar, a second one immediately sprouts up. Okay? Being mentioned arms, a character Saber Wolf appears, being a nice little nod to Saber Wolf himself. As for another thing, Rare included more and more dynamic posing. Okay. and even some more new characters. Killer Instinct hit arcades in 1985 and became a huge hit. Ironically enough, despite being able to compete with Mortal Kombat, it was actually published by Midway, along with Nintendo being one of the publishers. This would be one of the very few times that a rare game would not be published by multiple companies, and be the only time to do so in the arcades. As for the Killer Instinct, it was then ported to both the Game Boy and the Super Nintendo, with watered down versions of both. However, while the Killer Instinct franchise would continue on with another sequel to Killer Instinct Gold, a new console is passing up. In that case, it's time to go Ultra. The Nintendo 64, or the Ultra 64 in development, was hit the market in 1996, and immediately was a new console, set to compete with Sony's PlayStation and Sega Saturn. The first console game that Rare would make for it would be a small game called Blast Corps. Blast Corps didn't sell as big, but it became a huge hit nonetheless. However, the next games would be a huge seller nonetheless. We'll talk about the first one right here. Diddy Kong Racing is a simple racing game, but it adds innovations. You can pick through 3 vehicles itself: a hovercraft, a regular car, and a bike, and a plane. Okay? This game also includes a boss battle, and of course a hub world, and adventure mode. That's unique for a racing game. An adventure mode. Well, there's no platforming, of course. It's very unique. It's very unique in a sense. The storyline is that Timber Tiger is sent to look over his home with his friends. However, Whizpig crashes in a party and takes the whole land for himself. So Timber calls Diddy and all the friends was Diddy Kong. You have to see me saying that because now I know what happens. And it helps out. Diddy Kong Racing initially started life as Pro Am64 for the Nintendo 64. Breaking off the Pro Am64 license, it didn't even have Diddy Kong back then. Instead, it was made by the character of Timber the Tiger himself as main star. Timber the Tiger was originally supposed to be pretty big. To be the main character and to just the racing game. It was also initially, this idea however fell through, due to the name of the Pro Am license never being too little. They decided to add Donkey Kong label in afterwards. However, unlike other games, they didn't add Donkey Kong, they added Diddy Kong. Whoever had such connection to him being their creator. So, they made that a possibility. Diddy Kong Racing is known for a few things. Its catchy music was composed by the legendary Grant Kirkhope, who you'll be hearing the name of later on in the game franchise. As for the game controls, they are very loose, but they're very fun to control too. The game was a holiday release and made for a huge name nonetheless. Diddy Kong Racing was released on November 24th, 1987 in North America, while it released on stuff, and it became a huge hit. Critics loved it. There are even those critics and audiences who claim it's better than Mario Kart 64, which is a hell of a say if I have to say so myself. But the other game was even better. When Donkey Kong was successful, it's argued that 1987 game was one of the most well-known Rareware games of all time. So let's get to the game right now. Hit it, Tiatana! Yes, Goldeneye 007, probably the most well-known Rareware game of all time. Goldeneye 007 is in a third-person shooter where we take control of James Bond. Basically, the Pierce Brosnan version. We'll get to a few things that will cut eventually as you go through it, basically playing through the movie's events. But it's kind of a loose sequel. Goldeneye initially started life as a 2D platform from Nintendo. However, because of the changing times, they decided to move to 64. Realizing the 2D platformer was not really a good idea, concept emphasized 3D graphics, they decided to move over to become a bit more different. Initially starting out as a 3D platformer, they decided to change it up. Seeing the success of games like Wolfenstein 3D, Quake, and Doom, they made it a first-person shooter. An initial idea was to have all 4 Bonds at the time get there. Yeah, it wasn't just Plaza, but also Connery, Moore, and Dalton were all in the mix. Sean Connery, Roger Moore, and Timothy Dalton were all supposed to be in the game. No idea what happened to George Lazenby. I guess they didn't know that there was a 5th Bond. Whatever. Anyway, people remember that there was a 5th Bond for Daniel Craig. Anyways, the game itself initially didn't have those bonds. However, due to Space on 1064, it eventually was cut out. There was a rumor going on at Playgrounds, but you could actually unlock them via cheats. However, those rumors were eventually cut out. That in a sense. Goldeneye also initially was also smoothed out of the release date. The movie itself came out in 1985. The game itself only came out until 1997. And while yes, that is a pretty long gap between movie and game, it proved to be needed. GoldenEye 007 was released on August 25th, 1997 in North America, and it was amazing. It is one of the best shooters on the 1064, and it still holds up to this day. It's a great game. It became critical acclaim, and became one of the fastest selling games on 1064. And it's become one of the best movie adaptations of a game. They eventually had asked for the sequel to GoldenEye to Nice. However, that was cut in favor of doing other games. But as for our next game, I want you to look at the character selection screen of Diddy Kong Racing, as 2 of our next games are going to have that. Just look at the bear, and that bear leads us to our next game, Banjo Kazooie. Banjo Kazooie is probably the most well-known platformer that we ever made. Following a band named Banjo and a beagle named Kazooie, as they save their Banjo's sister Tootie from the witches of the evil witch Gruntilda. Initially, Banjo Kazooie though was not just have a bear or a bird as main character. Instead, main character was Edison. And it was maintained on Super Nintendo called Project Dream. It eventually maintained on 64. However, the 1064 version was eventually scrapped. Okay. However, there are also some nods to Project Dream in Banjo Kazooie and later in the sequel. The character Black Eye mentions Captain Project Dream a lot more, and it makes a lot of sense. However, there were some cuts overall still. A level called Mount Fire Eyes was meant to be in the game. If you listen closely to the character of Gobi, he says, "That's it! I'm off to the lava world." However, in Banjo Kazooie, there is no lava world. In Banjo Tooie, it's later found out that means Hellfire Peaks. But in actuality, it means a different world. There was meant to be a world called Mount Fire Eyes. However, it was cut due to space in 1064. Another thing that was cut was initially Banjo's moveset. If you look closely at Banjo's design early on, one thing that was made is that he had a bit of a skateboarder look to him. Well, this was eventually changed to have a bit more of a different look. Instead of having a bit of a skateboarder look, he was given a bit more of a everyman look. However, one thing they couldn't achieve well was a double jump. A double jump just looked weird. So in a sense, they added a new character, Kazooie. To contrast Banjo's easygoing personality, Kazooie was given a brash, loud personality that would mostly insult the characters, and also gave to some of the British humor the game has. However, probably the biggest scrap thing of Banjo Kazooie is the stop and swap. The stop and swap was an idea that was devised for the game, where Banjo Kazooie could swap out stuff. Here's how it works. Take Banjo Kazooie, basically, okay? In 1064, if you move a game, certain bits of RAM are still in the console. However, so Banjo Kazooie decided to implement this in a way. Whenever they decided to implement this in a very unique way, once you were done playing the game, you would take out the console of Banjo Kazooie, leaving some bits of RAM, and put in Banjo Tooie. So you got certain objects called that. That was called Stop and Swap, and you wanted to put games like that. However, Stop and Swap was cancelled for 2 main reasons. One, it was out there from Nintendo. Okay? Nintendo didn't want, as solid cartridges without powering the system off can lead to damage to Nintendo 64. And two, was revisions to Nintendo 64's hardware. The window originally was 10 seconds, and while yes, that is pretty not a lot of time, it is not time to do the process. However, unfortunately, that window was changed to 1 second, and since no one can do it, it rendered it basically impossible. However, the idea of stop and swap never left their minds. At the end of the game, you can see them collecting a few things, including some eggs and an ice key. And if you look close to Adventure Kazooie, while in the Walrus Cave, you can see an ice key. You're meant to collect this ice key in a sense. Another thing that was changed up was the fact, that in Lane 2E that you would see 3 eggs and an ice key. See, however, there are cheat codes to unlock these things, and also a new menu. Okay, Banjo Kazooie hit the market in the holiday season. In June 29th, 1998, and it sold like crazy. Another game that sold like crazy for Nintendo 64. Critics love the game, loving the graphics and the controls. They had issues with the camera, but when a Nintendo 64 game does not have a good camera. Rareware continued to make great games. The next game would be called Force Gemini. Force Gemini is somewhat of a unique title. Being a first-person shooter / platformer, it takes the role as two commanders trying to save a lot of their fleet. The game itself is just basically a standard 3D shooter, but with platform elements thrown in. For jumping, you'd actually use one of the C buttons instead of anything else, as there's very low camera control itself. The camera itself automatically controls. Reviews for Force Gemini were good, but it sold under what they were thinking. The next game, though, would be a bit of a different story. Here we go! After Donkey Kong 3, Dixie Kong Double Trouble, the next game was moved to Nintendo 64 entirely. Reports of the other games would be made, a new game was made instead. Donkey Kong 64 was added to the mix. Donkey Kong Country 64 added some new elements. Okay? The DK crew was made. It was featuring Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, along with 3 new Kongs. Tiny Kong, Dixie Kong's younger sister, Mickey Kong, a distant cousin to theirs, and Chunky Kong, the big strong brute who is good, okay? Described in the very own DK rap. DK, Donkey Kong. He's the leader of the bunch. Yeah, even I, a person who has not played much Donkey Kong 64, has got the rap stuck in their head. It's hella catchy, and it's amazing how that still is there to this day. And also, if you just want to figure out a profanity appearance in every game, cause this Kong's one hell of a guy. But anyways, back to Donkey Kong 64. The game itself is probably the biggest platform of time. So much so that a bug kept appearing whenever in the game. That bug, however, was fixed when the expansion pack was made, or so it said. In actuality, the bug still worked good. However, the expansion pack just made it a lot easier to run. Realizing that thinking there was a fix, they decided to put the expansion pack to test and release it as part of the expansion pack. Now the game tells you cannot play the game without the expansion pack. So, just remember, yeah. Just remember, the Donkey Kong 64, you need that expansion pack for the same. As for the expansion pack for Donkey Kong 64, the game itself is probably the biggest ever. There are more than 300 collectibles in total, with several bananas and cones afterwards. The game has probably too many of these things, but that's mainly to make a complaint with many fans, is that it has too much collectibles. The collectible was genre many fans also said it was dead for this game, but honestly it's still going strong to this day, so I don't really see an issue with it. Donkey Kong 64 also has a new, with weapons inspired by Funky Kong, music presented by Candy Con, and chemical reactions presented by Candy Con. The game itself released on November 24th, 1999. And like the other games, it sold well, being a huge hit for the Nintendo 64. As for the next game will be called Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark was presented to the first-person shooter genre. Starring a character named Joanna, it seemed she was dark. She was now the main. She was set in a post-apocalyptic future of 2023. I know that's ironic, but still, we'll get there. The game itself is a first-person shooter that was meant to be even more expansive than Goldeneye, despite running off the engine of Goldeneye. However, because of how expansive it was, the expansion pack was also quiet for this game too. It became one of Rareware's recitals, and it's basically one too. A first-person shooter game. It also became Rareware's first ever M-rated game for the Nintendo 64, as well as one of their first M-rated games released on the Nintendo 64. Previous Rareware games, including Goldeneye, were rated either E or T for teen. However, because of the amount of blood and gore, plus some sexual themes to the game, they added the M rating to the game, thus making the sounds like a bit more closed off, but still popular enough. Perfect Dark eventually got released in the year 2000 as the first game of the 20th century. Okay? The release date, of course, was of course set to be released on May 2000. There was never a Japanese release of this game, by the way, just FYI. But there was a European release on June 30th. The game itself received positive reviews and became a huge hit nonetheless. Next game, we're going to bring you back to the title screen, to the character selection screen of Diddy Kong Racing. We've always seen how Banjo got his own game, but the other one was this cute little squirrel. Man, what kind of game did he bring? Well, it was anything but a cute, cuddly game. Conker's Bad Fur Day is a raunchy, violent, gory, suggestive, and all-around mature platforming game, filled with a ton of British humor, swearing, and suggestive themes. But it didn't start this way. Initially, under the top game Conker's Quest, it was eventually changed to 12 Tales Conker's Adventure. The Banjo Kazooie team and the Conker team actually kind of had a fun rivalry. They made fun that both the games sucked. Well, not literally, but more figuratively. However, all that changed in 1999. A Game Boy Color version was actually released with the game called Conker's Pocket Tales. However, this was the last time Conker would have a color exterior. Development of 12 Tales was just troubled. It was not an easy game to go through, and as such, they decided to change things up drastically. After Conker's Pocket Tales, they decided to make it much more different. Okay, the story of Conker's Bad Fur Day goes like this. Conker, the squirrel, is now having a huge fun drinking out with friends. He's out to go back to his home with his girlfriend, friend Cherry. Unbeknownst to Conker and Barry though, a panther king wants to use Conker as a new leg for his stool, so that way he doesn't have his milk doesn't come falling. Conker has to escape this fate and eventually has to go through it all. The game itself is basically the exact opposite of a cutesy platformer, other than the platform elements themselves. So the game is a raunchy, adult-oriented game that's full of swearing, suggestive themes, and more. One of the bosses is a literal piece of fecal matter as its main thing, known as the Great Mighty Pooh. As for other things that would change, including movie references to famous movies at the time, like Saving Private Ryan and The Matrix, and humor that basically is the swearing tone of the game itself. Kind of giving a kind of similar tone to something like Monty Python at the time, that would add absurd humor to typical things. However, because of how it was, Conker's Bad Fur Day was given an and for mature rating. And it wasn't marketed the same way. Nintendo almost didn't want to just give it a 10-foot pole. They released it, but there is something to note. Nintendo doesn't note. It was Rareware had to make this game work. To sell the game, Conker's Bad Fur Day was initially sold in Playboy magazine. Yes, I am serious. Playboy magazine. Not only that, but Conker's Bad Fur Day was also later on added to other things too. Because of the mature rating and the lack of wooden console, Conker's Bad Fur Day, when it released, sold poorly. Conker's Bad Fur Day was released in 2001. Was released on March 5th, 2001. Unfortunately, the game itself underperformed. Why? Well, again, for 3 reasons. Again, for one thing, it was marketed poorly. It was more of a word-of-mouth game, a mature-rated N64 platformer with swearing in it and alcohol references and suggestive themes. What the hell was going on here? But the other 2 reasons were a bit more different. For one thing, this game released in March 2001, near the end of the Nintendo 64's lifespan. As such, less people were more interested in Nintendo 64 and more interested in the new game, the Nintendo GameCube. And 2 was mainly due to changing times. The 3D platformer phase was still going strong, but mascot platformers were no longer a huge draw. And as such, the game itself didn't receive much sales. On the bright side though, critics seem to like it, and the game has a cult following. And despite selling less than 600,000 units, the game itself still is a map. We still have. However, this will be the last time a successful Nintendo would ever see much success with Rareware, as we will see more adventures after the break.
Goldeneye. Load a rumble pack.
You know how to use one of these?
And see how it feels when 007 meets N64. Nintendo 64, the fastest, most powerful games console on Earth.
So what do I mean by that? That 2001 will be the last year Rareware would have changed. Well, the GameCube will be released in 2001. Kind of having one of the discs in a sense with a console to compete with Sony's PlayStation 2 and the new Microsoft Xbox. And Rareware's first game to be released was Starfox Adventures. However, Starfox Adventures wasn't always meant to be a Star Fox game. The game is radically different from any other Star Fox game. Instead of being a space shooter, the game is a platformer instead. Weirdly enough though, initially it was going to be the game Planet and Star Planet. Dinosaur Planet was meant to be a big Adventure 64 game that was meant to be a huge feature. Unfortunately, Dinosaur Planet was eventually turned into Star Fox. One main character, Crystal, who was meant to be playable characters instead, was meant to turn into a MacGuffin, if you will. So, another thing that occurred included Falco not being in the game. In actuality, it was just because they didn't have time to include him. It was just that. And the fact that the game Star Fox Adventures controls more like a Zelda game than anything else, being the closest thing to Zelda on Star Fox. The game itself would release on September 23rd, 2002, and critics seemed to like it. While a few fans were more mixed on the gameplay, it being more Zelda themed, it did well. It also sold well. However, this will be the last time Rareware would be on a home console with Nintendo. Why? Well, it gets a bit complicated, okay? During the shift over from production of Conker's Bad Fur Day and Perfect Dark, Rareware asked Nintendo for a bigger budget, or just buy the company outright. Okay? They were planning to make more and more games for the GameCube that would make become even heavier in terms of graphics. Nintendo said no, thinking that they didn't need to warn. Rareware, on the other hand, differently. Two buyers stood out afterwards: Activision and Microsoft. Activision's buyer was interesting to Rare, how Microsoft was just giving more and more money. And as such, which Microsoft eventually got you. On September 24th, 2002, the day after Starfox Adventures released, Microsoft bought Rare for $375 million. Thus making Rareware a first-party developer for Microsoft. This made some changes. First things first, all existing properties made for Nintendo games were now owned by Nintendo for good. That means any Donkey Kong Country and Star Fox characters that Rare had made were now owned by Rare themselves, owned by Nintendo and no longer owned by Rareware. The name Rareware also dropped, instead of just calling the company Rare. Rare got to keep characters of Nintendo they made there, like Banjo and Conker. Another thing that was changed was that a lot of games that Rare was making at the time had to get scrapped or changed up. Games for the GameCube included that would get cancelled or reworked, included a sequel to Conker's Bad Fur Day called Conker's Other Bad Fur Day, a game for Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong's Conker the Clankers, a puzzle game, Diddy Pilot, a racing and pilot game for Donkey Kong Country franchise, Banjo Kazooie sequel called Banjo 3, a game called Kameo, to Power, and most surprisingly enough, a Donkey Kong sequel to Diddy Kong Racing called Donkey Kong Racing. All these games were either changed in development or were made incredibly more different. As for the first game under Microsoft's tenure, would be a game called By The Ghoulies. By The Ghoulies stars Cooper as he has to try and search for Amber while in a haunted house. The game itself is pretty similar to Luigi's Mansion. Oh wait, did I say pretty similar? No. I mean, it's pretty much the Xbox version of Luigi's Mansion. I am not kidding. Okay, Xbox version of Luigi's Mansion. So, okay, and that's probably a lot of things. Initially started development for the GameCube, it was moved on to Microsoft, and Microsoft bought the Xbox. Because Microsoft didn't they gave the game a quick schedule, thus asking for a quick turnaround time. And as such, By The Ghoulies was receiving a lack of polish. By The Ghoulies was released for the Xbox on October 21st, 2003 in America. Critics were mixed upon it. The gameplay and the graphics were more mixed upon, either calling it a Luigi's Mansion or just calling it outdated time. It also sold as copies than before. A sequel was in development, but as of 2025, it hasn't received the light of day just yet. Weirdly enough, one part of the deal that I didn't mention is that Rareware could still make games for Nintendo consoles, just on the handhelds. Microsoft had no interest in getting a handheld market anytime soon, so they allowed it. THQ would help publish titles, including titles like Banjo Kazooie, Monster's Revenge, Banjo Pilot, and It's Mr. Pants, and a racing game for called Diddy Kong Racing. Yes, a remake of Diddy Kong Racing. However, one thing that will be new games for the starring the characters. The first one of these would be Conker Live and Reloaded. Devised originally as Conker Live and Uncut, the game itself was eventually censored. Despite the Microsoft's Xbox being touted as a more mature console, it was heavily censored. All bad words were changed, and all words, even light words like crap, were censored. So, in actuality, this is more live and censored, actually. However, and that was probably the biggest complaint. Despite being on a more mature platform, Conker Live and Unloaded was unfortunately sold about as well as the previous Conker game. And unfortunately, critics were way more mixed with it. Multiplayer was praised, but most of it felt more derivative. As for the next system, they were planning to two launch titles. One was meant to revive. Joanne Dog had been absent from Microsoft's lineup, but with the release of a Puppet Dog sequel wasn't in the works for the GameCube. However, this was scrapped when Microsoft was bought Rare. So instead, a prequel was named called Puppet Dog Zero for the Xbox 360, taking place 3 years beforehand. The game itself is a bit as Joanna is on earlier missions beforehand. The game itself wasn't a huge hit when it was released. Critics were kind of mixed towards it. While the gameplay was lauded at the time, the storyline was mixed, and it caused a lot of things. It also sold on expectations. The other one was an entirely new IP, Kameo Elements Power. Kameo was initially released on the GameCube. However, again, due to Microsoft being buying Rare out, Kameo put platforms to the Xbox, where the open go would continue to work there. Unfortunately, that would not. Instead, the collection moved to Xbox 360 in 2004. Kameo Elements Power released in 2005. It did okay. Critics liked the game, and it did well enough for critics. It was a bit of a weaker seller, but it still did well enough to at least get the idea down that it wasn't a failure on other things. As for the next game, it was a bit different though. Viva Piñata is the closest thing we can consider to Rare's own answer to something like Pikmin or Animal Crossing. The game is about gardening and is about where you take the control of your own creatures of piñatas. The character is very much unique, where you can control these piñatas and see how things go. The game itself was released in 2006. And despite everything, it actually sold well enough. A launch title, Viva Piñata actually came out of a hit. It got its own 4Kids series that ran for 2 seasons, 52 episodes, and it got into sequels later on. Overall, Viva Piñata is a good game. However, I can't say the next reboot franchise, Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Again, initially starting life as Banjo Kazooie on the GameCube, Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts was eventually scrapped by Rare when it came out. In 2005, Banjo was revitalized in a sense. After both the success of Banjo Kazooie One Day's Revenge and Banjo Pilot on the Advance, again, Rare had no interest in the console market, so these were made in some things would happen. Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts was initially called Banjo X, and would be a rebrand of the first 2 games, kind of being a. This also got scrapped later on. Eventually, though, they started making it more and more thinking. Going with the construction aspect, that was similar to Lego at the time. Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts was released in 2008. Unfortunately, the game was seeing mixed reviews from critics and fans also. Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is an odd game. For one thing, well, it's a game where you basically build cars like with Lego. And being released on November 11th, 2008 was a bit of an odd idea when it's not really a platform, but more of a car builder. However, it sold relatively well. However, this was the last time that the Rare would work with Stamper Brothers. In 2007, Tim and Chris Stamper would leave the company, and instead Greg Mayless would take it over. But they realized that Microsoft wasn't going as smoothly as possible. As in terms of sales, at the time only 66 million games were being made, and Rare was starting to lose their interest in advance. So they decided to continue. The Xbox Kinect is very simple. If you guys don't know, the Xbox Kinect, you use your whole body as a controller. Unlike, say, the Nintendo Wii or PlayStation Move, which, by the way, Kinect is actually kind of a Xbox version of the Wii that was very successful, there was no controller. You are the controller. Unfortunately, this is not as smooth as you think it is. Because of how your body moves, the controls feel clunky and awkward to use, and it can be delayed at times too. There are times when I was playing on the Kinect myself where I would run and my character would not even move, despite the fact that I myself am still running. It's incredibly perfunctory and it doesn't really work in the same ways. it just isn't good to play. We are slowly exiting more. The Kinect itself did not get the good reviews it did. However, it did eventually get notoriety. The first game that Rareware would make with Kinect though would be Kinect Sports. Kinect Sports is basically the Kinect version of Wii Sports. Just look at Rareware's become nowadays. Rareware became getting on for Donkey Country and Goldeneye is now making a Wii. It's basically making a basic ass Wii Sports cologne that doesn't control great. And Kinect Sports also had an issue too. It's so great being in time we got in 2010. However, how critics were mixed towards it, and mainly due to the controls. And call it a basic Wii Sports clone. Okay? However, sequels would develop the Kinect afterwards. Afterwards though, Rareware's history becomes spotty. In 2015, Rare Replay was made. Rare Replay seemed to do pretty well. It publishes several other games. Other games like Donkey Kong games and Goldeneye were included. It was mainly just because of rights issues. Also, around 2009, by the time before Kinect 6 was released, Banjo Kazooie was re-released on Xbox Live Arcade with some quality of life updates, including having notes that would save and a reintegrated stop and swap. As now that the Xbox's Live is made, Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Kazooie can finally have stop and swap be included. As for the other things that we added, Banjo Kazooie, though, Rare continued to start work on Sea of Thieves. Sea of Thieves was a pirate game that had several packs on day one, or season passes. Sea of Thieves was initially meant to become a huge hit, having the data down that they would sell pretty well. Unfortunately, Sea of Thieves undersold. Critics and audiences were mixed towards it when it came out in 2018, and it was undersold. Surprisingly enough, though, another thing that came out pretty quickly though was a re-release. Was an odd thing. In 2019, the news broke. Banjo was added to Smash Ultimate. What? Banjo was in Smash Ultimate as a backpack? How? Well, fan requests and Microsoft allowing it made Banjo Kazooie allowable on there. Okay? But what was even crazier was it happened in 2020. Banjo Online Kit was released that year. It was released in 2021 when Donkey Country finally debuted on the SNES and the Treasure Online Kit. This didn't seem Donkey Country had already been made yet. What was even more surprising was on the Nintendo 64 expansion pack the year after. Including a little blurb up top, you could see Banjo Kazooie's return. Banjo Kazooie, a game that was owned by Microsoft and Rareware, was on a Nintendo console. The Nintendo Online console had that, allowing for newer fans to get into it. As for the Nintendo 64 other games though, it became a bit weirder. Banjo Kazooie later on became a huge name in the franchise. And other games would become in the franchise afterwards. Later on, games like Banjo Kazooie and Goldeneye also joined the Success Pound 2. Emperor Dog was added on it for a mature rating platform. So, afterwards, they released a sequel to Battletoads. That's here. Unfortunately, this sequel gave mixed reviews, and it will be the last time Rare will make a game as of 2025. There are plans for more games, but Rareware's time has definitely come. Rareware is an interesting company. The game itself was basically the talk of the town in the 90s when it came to Nintendo platforms. Releasing hit after hit with games like Battletoads, Donkey Kong Country, Goldeneye, Diddy Kong Racing, Banjo Kazooie games, Donkey Kong 64, Perfect Dog, and Conker Back Friday. Come 2002, after releasing Starfox Adventures, they eventually were bought out by Microsoft, and eventually they became a shell of their former selves, selling games that would underperform at the same time. Rare is an interesting case of a company that would rise and fall. Having unpopular games, but still having great things. However, one thing that's surprising is something else that happened later on. 2017, a new Viva came around with a new game, Platonic Games. And as such, they made a game called Yooka-Laylee. A serious successor to Banjo Kazooie, and all the same veins. Mixed reviews and all, the game itself was basically kind of made there. But somewhat similar to Banjo Kazooie was the fact that many of the developers actually held out development in this game, including some many old players at the same time too. The future of Rareware could be brighter, but we don't know what's going to happen. Okay? With Dark Games still working on other games, it seems that Microsoft doesn't know what to do with the Rare lineup. Rareware has gone through an incredible journey in 3 years, going up and down. And while yes, it still is there, it still makes for a journey that nonetheless. Okay, that's all for this episode. And as such, I'll see what history develops for Rareware as we look around 2025. Thank you all so much for watching the League on the Phone podcast. If you want to watch more of this show, it is on YouTube, Spotify, Patreon, and Amazon, wherever you watch podcasts. Please come follow me on Bluesky anytime if you can. And please don't hit the Patreon. $50 a month, you can get this podcast on there. You can also subscribe to more other things. Until next time, take care. And I will see you all later.